Hello, welcome to today's lesson. Let's go over our lesson objective. So our lesson objective for today we will explain the phases of sedimentary rock formation. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So with sedimentary rocks, we have 5 phases. So our first phase is weathering. Our second phase is erosion. Our third phase is deposition. Our fourth phase is compaction, and our fifth phase is cementation. And then what happens is after cementation, we go all the way back up to the top. Right? So it's kind of like a cycle of what we have, right? So we do weathering, erosion, deposition, compaction, cementation, and then it repeats back to weathering. All right, let's go ahead and look at each of these phases individually. So our first phase that we're going to look at is weathering. So weathering is the breaking down of land or rocks. Okay, so we're breaking down land or rocks. So over here we have a rock. It has a crack in it, right? Now, water is going to enter into that crack and then it's going to freeze. And the freezing of that water is going to cause that crack to get bigger or to expand, which will then make the crack even bigger or go even deeper. And then our crack will get bigger. And then more water will go in there and it'll freeze. And then the crack will get bigger. And this is going to keep happening and happening and happening until finally the rock ends up breaking. So where water is going to get in there, it's going to freeze, then it's going to thaw out, our crack's going to get bigger, then more water is going to get in. So it's a whole cycle until finally our rock breaks into tiny little pieces. Now, weathering doesn't only have to happen with water. It can also happen with air. It can also happen with someone or something physically breaking the rocks, right? But weathering is basically the breaking down of land and rocks or rocks. Okay, so that's weathering. That's phase 1 of our sedimentary rock phase. Now, let's go ahead and look at phase 2. So phase 2 is called erosion. Some people like to put erosion and transport together, but we're going to go ahead and just call this the erosion phase. So erosion is where our eroded sediments end up in the water and begin to settle down. Not necessarily water. So the sediments are our broken pieces of rock that happen from weathering. With erosion is basically movement. So our water may move all of our rocks down a river, for example. Another way that things can get eroded is by wind, right? So our wind can move our rocks. It can transport and erode our rocks to somewhere else. So it's basically just movement. Erosion is a process of our rocks getting carried to somewhere else. Okay, now let's go ahead and look at our next phase. Our next phase is deposition. So deposition, if you think of deposit, that basically means we are dropping these rocks off somewhere, right? So our water is eroding and transporting our rocks from one area to somewhere else, and then it's depositing it or dumping it in another part of the bank or maybe at the bottom of the lake, right? So deposition is where all of our rocks, our little sediments, our rock sediments get deposited or get dropped off. That is deposition. Now let's look at compaction. So compaction is a really important part of sedimentary rocks. So compaction is basically we have all of our little rock sediments that have been dropped off in one location, maybe at the bottom of this river. And compaction is basically pressure that is being pushed onto our rocks. And so the moisture is getting released. And it's making our rock sediments really tightly packed together. So compaction is packing our rock pieces together so it's really, really tight and they can't really move. Right? So we're pushing all the extra air out, all the extra water out, all the extra moisture out, and getting our rocks really, 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 really close together. That is compaction. Now, our last phase is a process called cementation. So cementation is, if you think about like cement, it's basically acting like a glue to glue all of our compacted rock sediments together to form one solid piece of rock. That is cementation. And usually the cementation will be in the form of salt crystals. So our salt crystals are going to go ahead and glue all of our rock pieces together. And that's going to create our sedimentary rocks. So let's go ahead and look at our phase again. So first we have weathering. Then we have erosion, which is the movement of our broken rocks. Then we have deposition, where we drop off our rock sediments. Compaction is we are pushing all of those rock sediments together. And then finally, we have cementation, which is like salt crystals that are going to act as a glue to keep all of those rock pieces together. And then we might go through, and these new rocks that have just been created may go ahead and go all the way back and go through our weathering again. So maybe wind or air is going to break down those rocks even more. All right, what's going to happen through that whole process is we are now going to get something called sedimentary rocks. So sedimentary rocks are formed when particles of other rocks are deposited in layers and are compacted, crushed together, and cemented. Cement, which is the binding of the sediments. So a big characteristic of sedimentary rocks is that you will see these layers. So if you look at this rock right here, we see all of these different layers from these colors, right? So this is showing us that these are different types of rocks that have been deposited and then pushed down together and cemented. And we actually have this huge like hill right here that was formed, but this whole thing is a sedimentary rock. So this took years and years, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years to get formed. But through this process, we can get some really cool rocks and really cool structures. All right, let's go ahead and take a review of our lesson objective. So our lesson objective for today is we explain the phases of our sedimentary rock formations. All right, well, I hope this was helpful. I hope you had so much fun learning about sedimentary rocks with me, and I'll see you next time. Bye, y'all.